Time now for the news review of this bulletin. Another act of murder by a Saudi national on U.S. soil. This time a military personnel receiving training in America goes on a shooting rampage, killing 3 people and wounding many others. U.S. officials are yet to brand the incident as an act of terror.
A nation of evil. This is reportedly the way a shooter has described America before opening fire at people at a U.S. naval base in the state of Florida. A U.S. intelligence group says a Saudi man identified as Mohammed al-Shamrani posted a manifesto on Twitter expressing such hatred against America. In an account now suspended, he's denounced Americans for, quote, their support and funding of crimes not only against Muslims but also humanity. On top of these, al-Shamrani has quoted former al-Qaeda leader Osama bin Laden to justify his attack. Investigators are still working to see if the manifesto was indeed written by the shooter himself. It all happened on Friday morning when the Saudi second lieutenant used his handgun to take on other trainees and sheriffs at a classroom building at Pensacola Base in Florida. The base has been offering piloting training to members of the Saudi military for decades. The Florida governor called on Saudi authorities to account for the incident, given the fact that those sent to the U.S. to receive military training are supposed to go through a strict vetting.
But obviously, the government of Saudi Arabia needs to make things better for these victims, and I think that they're going to owe a debt here, given that this is one of their individuals.
U.S. President Donald Trump, who has established cozy relations with Saudi Arabia, limited his reaction to the deadly shooting to mentioning his telephone call with the Saudi monarch, in which Saudi King Salman expressed condolences.
King Salman of Saudi Arabia just called to express his sincere condolences and give his sympathies to the families and friends of the warriors who were killed and wounded in the attack that took place just recently, just this morning in Pensacola, Florida.
His lax reaction sparked widespread outcry on social media, where people slammed the American president for doing nothing when it comes to crimes committed by Saudi Arabia and its people. Some social media users mentioned the 9/11 attacks, in which 15 Saudi nationals took part in the deadliest terror attack on American soil. Some others referred to the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, who was a U.S. resident and was assassinated by Saudi operatives in Istanbul. Many social users also highlighted Trump's double standard in imposing a travel ban on several Muslim countries while excluding Saudi Arabia. Donald Trump has repeatedly and openly justified his inaction towards the Saudi crimes, saying Riyadh is making money for the U.S. and he does not want to harm billions of dollars of trade with the Saudis for their violations.
As far as Donald Trump is concerned, he wants to keep this business relationship with Saudi Arabia flowing. He wants the arms sales to continue unabated. He wants Saudi Arabia to purchase as much product from the United States as possible.
Saudi Arabia is the birthplace and promoter of the ultra-extremist Wahhabi ideology, which breeds hatred and violence against those who do not see eye to eye with members of the community. Both current and former American officials, including former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, have revealed the Saudi regime's support for the ideology and called on the kingdom to stop the propagation of the squad, which they say is behind the creation of many terrorist groups, including Daesh.
Marcus Papadopoulos, an editor at Politics First, who joins us from London to discuss this further. We have Sayyid Mohsin Abbas, journalist and political commentator, also joining us from London. Welcome you both. Sayyid Mohsin Abbas, I'll start with you. You have 9/11, you have the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, and now you have this. There could be, of course, the whole ideology of Wahhabism that exists in Saudi Arabia. What is your reading into what has occurred here? And, of course, President Trump's, it seems indirect but somewhat direct support for the Saudi prince.
Everybody else, a Muslim or some people like a Muslim, seems like who actually immediately labeled as terrorists. But it's Saudi involved, and especially if it's got links to Saudi establishment, we suddenly get this whitewashing, this kind of exceptionalism, this protectiveness of Saudi Arabia for the reasons that your report has outlined, and I won't go over those. But the shady world of counterterrorism here in the West, again, surfaces. Its head is always never far from the surface, but it's, again, a case here of questioning, asking questions. Who benefits from such attacks? Is this a methodology for putting more pressure on the likes of Saudi by the deep state? Is it really actually about keeping the American public mizzled that there is a need for this counterterrorism across the world, this so-called war on terror? I mean, all of this is just really inducing more conflict, more fear, more demoralization within the American people, but also keeping them locked into the agenda that has started maybe even pre-George Bush. So there are a lot of questions in my mind. I'll come on later to the connection to 9/11 perhaps, because there are very interesting things that haven't been revealed about 9/11, which are in the congressional reports that were finally, if you like, made public in 2016, which we need to look at. And again, they're very relevant to this, what could be yet another cover-up, again, on this occasion.
And Marcus Papadopoulos, do you believe that there is this type of sentiment when it comes to the U.S. coming from Saudi Arabia that poses a threat to the U.S.?
I must first of all tackle a common misconception about America, namely that the American government is anti-Muslim and wages a crusade against Muslims. No, the reality is that the American government will support any group or any government or any ideology, no matter how diabolical they are, providing that that country or ideology or organization is able to help America achieve a geostrategic objective. So the Americans supported the Mujahideen, including Osama bin Laden, against the Soviet army. The Americans supported the Bosnian Muslim authorities, which were allied with Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden. Indeed, Aliyah Izetbegovic gave Osama bin Laden a passport, and Osama bin Laden was seen at the Holiday Inn Hotel in Sarajevo in 1994 during the Bosnian Civil War. And of course, the Americans supported the Albanian organized crime, and the Americans have very close friendly relations with Saudi Arabia and other Gulf countries. So the Americans have no moral compunction about supporting any organization providing that enhances America's global hegemony. Now, turning to Saudi Arabia, the problem for the Americans is this, is that without Saudi Arabia, it is very difficult to see how America would have the stranglehold that it exerts over the Middle East. But at the same time for the Americans, that risks blowback, because Saudi Arabia is the leading exporter and chief financier of religious extremism and terrorism in the world. So whilst the Americans benefit immensely from their relationship with the Saudis, of course, there are going to be individuals within Saudi Arabia who are going to take it upon themselves to attack the Americans, be it in the Gulf or at home in America. So that is the risk that the Americans run. And of course, we haven't just seen that in the last few days with the attack at that American military base by a Saudi national, but also on 9/11, most of the terrorists were, of course, Saudis. And the American government have to try and downplay what has happened, or they have to try and kill the story. And we saw that with Donald Trump. Donald Trump responded to the attack at the American military base by saying that the King of Saudi Arabia had called him up to offer his sincere condolences. And that is a way of Donald Trump saying to the American public that Saudi Arabia, yes, it has individuals who do not like America, but Saudi Arabia is an important friend and ally of America. If the American public knew the reality of Saudi Arabia, if they knew the reality of Wahhabism, then I think it would be very difficult for any American president to maintain this relationship with Saudi Arabia.
Mohsen Abbas, if the figure that finally came out, which was 4 that were killed, had another digit added to it, do you think the approach by the U.S. would be different?
Well, I don't think so. I mean, I think that they have committed to this long-term rape resort of the Middle East, and they use the proxies they themselves have been involved in creating. We talk about Wahhabism and the kind of Muslims that the Americans, or certainly the American administration, supports. Well, they're the kind that they manufactured themselves. Saudi Takfirism, or Wahhabism, is nothing other than British and American joint projects to actually infiltrate the Muslim world and to create proxy forces in those regions, which became a time bomb, which they released. Now, whether that's the American administration doing it or whether there's a shadow deep state which is getting involved with these things, I don't know. Then you're in the realm of areas I can't tell. But what I can tell you is that the 9/11 incident in itself remains, the questions remain unanswered. Page 415, for instance, in that congressional report from which was released in 2016, says that while the United States September 11 hijackers were in contact with and received support and assistance from individuals who may be connected to the Saudi government, at least 2 of those individuals were alleged by some to be Saudi intelligence officers. And so it goes on, page 417, 418. There's, one individual is identified in the pages as a financial supporter of 2 of the 9/11 hijackers. His name was Osama Basnan, and he later received a significant amount of cash from a member of the Saudi royal family. So it does seem as though there's a lot of evidence there for the Americans to recognize that the Saudi government is involved. But then, so is the CIA and presumably the rest of their intelligence services. So everybody knows what they're up to. Let's bring it to Europe. The British government itself also suppressed its own report on Saudi Arabia and its connections to terrorism, and still hasn't released that report. The Khashoggi case is another case in point. The finances and the money that went into starting the Syrian civil war, the Libyan crisis, and virtually every other conflict in the Middle East, all roads go through Saudi Arabia, around Riyadh, and back to Washington.
Thank you for that, Mohsen Abbas, journalist and political commentator. And thank you, Marcus Papadopoulos, editor, Politics First. And that does it for the news review. Thanks for tuning in.